All right, welcome back. We'll bring it back a little closer to reality. When I've been going down some rabbit holes lately and taking a deeper look at what's factual and what's debunked on all this pizza stuff and all this other crap. But there's a lot of stuff floating around the social media sphere about testing and spiking and increasing and plateauing and all this stuff. And we try to bring you people who can just give you the straight dope on it. And we got a really good one today. Joining us for the first time, Dean Fanelli. He's a Ph.D. and an expert on pharmaceutical and chemical-related technologies. Dean, thanks for joining us. The first coronavirus vaccine tested is ready now to go to the final phase. They're saying, the smaller test, 50-50 placebo test. Now it's going to be expanded, I believe, to 30,000 humans. Is that right?
Thanks for having me, John. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Pfizer and BioNTech, a German company, are collaborating on a phase 3 trial that should start in the next couple of weeks before the end of the month. That'll test 30,000 patients. And that's, you hit it on the head. That's the key trial. That's what's going to really prove if these vaccines work, this phase 3 trial.
So Dr. Fauci has come under attack, from a lot of different angles. There's science to some of these predictions and stuff, but then there's just the human condition. Everything can change quickly. These hypothetical models don't always reflect fact. Me being of Italian-American descent, I was just happy to have an Italian guy in there. I felt better having an old Italian grandpa, but he said, and I thought he was hedging a little bit, but, he recently said, no matter how you slice it, this is good news. Meaning, I don't know if it's going to be the final, but the fact that we have more to go forward with and we have another human test plan, this is good news. What do you think the odds are of this being a possible vaccine?
Yeah, I think it's definitely good news. When you think about the long scheme of things, John, we're typically talking, 10 years to develop a vaccine. So the genome for this coronavirus was identified in January. And, fast forward 6 months, we're talking about going into phase 3. It's definitely positive. These phase 1 and phase 2 combined trials that just concluded have shown some positive results, have shown that the immune system is responding in a positive way. So it's all leading in the right direction. We're going to look at this phase 3 study when it comes out, and, everybody's got their fingers crossed. But so far, things are looking positive.
So there is some stuff out there about the Moderna vaccine, that the Moderna vaccine had adverse reactions in more than half of the trial participants. What does that mean? I think every time you turn around, you see a commercial, the last 20 seconds are laying out all the adverse things that could happen to you. Is this just normal course with stuff like this, or is this something to be worried about?
Yeah, that's certainly, you do see those on those commercials, and it's kind of funny. But in this case, when we see these adverse effects, typically you get your flu shot, you roll up your sleeve, you get an deltoid shot, and you have some minor side effects like muscle pain, injection site pain, maybe slight fever, fatigue. More than half of the patients showed adverse effects, but it's the severity. There's a risk-benefit analysis here. So we're looking at, was there an immunogenic effect? And we saw that. That's the positive effect. Were there some adverse effects? Yes. But the good news is that even though about half the patients in the Moderna study or half the subjects showed this adverse effect, none of them were life-threatening adverse effects or so great that it wouldn't move to the next study. I mean, typically you were talking about, as I mentioned, injection site pain, a little fatigue, maybe nausea. There was one subject, I think, that developed hives, but overall, good news on the adverse effects. They were all what you'd expect and not the serious adverse effects.
Yeah, I mean, if the question from the doctor is a little diarrhea or COVID, I'm going to take the diarrhea for a couple. You know what I mean? A lot of these side effects are, part of the human condition, if you ask me. I tried Wellbutrin to try to eliminate my tobacco and nicotine addiction. And after 3 or 4 days, I was having these really vivid and crazy dreams, and it was kind of giving me anxiety to go to sleep because I don't want to go there again. So I stopped taking it. But that thing's on the market, and I can't even imagine how many people are experiencing that. But I don't know. I couldn't stop doing it. Sometimes the adverse effects are kind of potluck on different people, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that's why we look at these clinical trials. They look at huge studies. Here we're talking about 30,000 people and probably more as more people are ultimately tested. But yeah, there's this, like I mentioned, there's a risk benefit analysis. And as you mentioned, if it's, not a severe side effect, a mild side effect that you could deal with, the benefits certainly outweigh those risks.
So now they're calling for, scientists are calling for more volunteers to come out. I would think that 30,000 over the whole country doesn't sound like a lot. How difficult is it to get volunteers for something like this? And I would think for us to get some real, measurable results, they'd have to get people that are kind of more susceptible, people with underlying conditions or older people, and see how it works in that instance. Is it tougher to get them as they become more susceptible?
Yeah, so typically, that's a great question. So typically, you're looking at the initial studies you test and these were done in 18 to 55-year-olds, what you would consider healthy people. And what you look at is the level of these antibodies and that are generated by these experimental vaccines, and you compare that to the levels that people who've already recovered who've had the coronavirus and who have recovered. So you're hoping that the vaccine produces a higher immunogenicity response, and we've seen that in the Pfizer-BioNTech study. They saw a 2 to 3 time increase, and in the Moderna study, I think it was 3 to 4 times versus these convalescent patients. So, another interesting thing, they've been talking about having what's called challenge studies, where you inject the vaccine in a healthy person and then you expose them to the virus to see whether the vaccine actually works. Now, there's a lot of course, ethical considerations that go in there, but I've just heard that they've started talking about potentially doing those as well.
So there's no way we can give them both at the same time, right? See if maybe the double dose works.
No, typically you want to do one thing at once and not vary multiple things.
Yeah. No, we sometimes take a look at the lighter side of some of this stuff too. So, sometimes you got to laugh when it gets this crazy. But what about, and I don't know if you can weigh in on this or not, but, there was, a lot of people who felt like the media hated the word hydroxychloroquine because the president mentioned it. And if he never mentioned it, it would have been used. And then there was a study that came out of South America that said that it was causing heart palpitations and arrhythmia. And now there was a more recent study that came out that said it had a prophylactic effect. Do you think hydroxychloroquine got caught in the media cipher?
Yeah, there's a lot of, you got to take the politics out of this. Politics is kind of ruling the day, unfortunately, now, and you got to let the science dictate. The FDA did, US FDA looks at the science, strictly the science, and they pulled the politics out of it. And, they had granted hydroxychloroquine emergency use authorization, meaning that it could be used to potentially treat coronavirus patients. They withdrew that emergency use authorization. The FDA is certainly, there were politics around it, but the FDA is the premier regulatory agency in the country, if not the world. And the fact that they withdrew the emergency use authorization has to lead me to believe that, the science just wasn't there to support giving this to patients.
But yeah, I understand that. And, there's this other, 3D chess discussion about whether the FDA is, part of the deep state, and they're again, there's all this other conspiracy out there. But I talked to a bunch of guys who are pharmacists, who are good friends of mine, who said that they had doctors who were basically prescribing it, as a, to anyone over 50 as a, arthritic or lupus, and it was helping people until the FDA banned it. If it's allowed to be given, in our final minute here, if it's allowed to be given to people for other diseases, if a doctor says, hey, I'm willing to put my license on the line, why would they prevent it? It's strange.
Yeah, so it's just certainly doctors are allowed to give off-label drugs that are approved for one indication and give them to another indication. So certainly doctors are still allowed to administer or prescribe the hydroxychloroquine. I think in this case, the FDA, the regulatory body, just didn't see that the science was there to back that up.
All right. All right. Well, we got to leave it there. Dean, thank you so much. Dean Fanelli is a Ph.D. He's an expert on pharmaceutical and chemical-related technologies. Straight shooter. We got to have you back. You got to be one of our guys to break this stuff down. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, John.
All right. Dean Fanelli, have a great weekend. You guys stay right there. It's not the weekend yet. Just a few more minutes. We'll be back right after this.